I always thought my relationship with my future mother-in-law was decent. Not warm exactly, but cordial, respectful. I understood her protectiveness of her only son and tried to be patient with her occasional cold shoulders or probing questions about my career. After all, family relationships are complicated, and I was prepared to put in the work to build a solid foundation with the woman who had raised the man I loved. That all changed 3 months before our wedding, with a single text message that was never meant for my eyes. My name is Natalie, and until recently I was engaged to be married to James, my partner of 4 years. We met at a mutual friend's housewarming party, bonded over a shared love of obscure documentaries, and quickly became inseparable. The relationship progressed naturally, dating, moving in together, and finally an intimate proposal at the botanical gardens where we had our third date. Throughout our relationship, James's mother Diana had always been a slightly uncomfortable presence. She was unfailingly polite, but with an underlying coolness that never quite thawed. James was her only child, and they had always been close, especially after his father passed away when James was in college. I respected their bond and never tried to come between them, even when Diana would call during our date nights or when she'd make subtle comments about how her son could have ended up with anyone. James worked in finance, following in his late father's footsteps. He had done well for himself with a promising career at a prestigious firm. I was a graphic designer with my own small studio, doing work I loved but that would never make me wealthy. The income disparity between us was something we discussed openly and decided didn't matter. We pooled resources for household expenses and maintained separate accounts for personal spending. It worked for us. Diana, however, seemed to fixate on this difference. She would make casual references to designer items I couldn't afford, or ask pointed questions about my student loans. James would gently redirect these conversations, but I noticed them accumulating over time like small paper cuts. When we announced our engagement, Diana's response was measured. "If you're sure this is what you want," she told James while I stood right beside him. Then she hugged him and offered me a brief, stiff embrace. Later that night, she posted on social media about her son's engagement, with a photo that somehow managed to crop me halfway out of the frame. Still, I was determined to make it work. This was the woman who would be my children's grandmother someday. There had to be common ground we could find. 2 weeks after the engagement, Diana invited us to dinner at her sprawling suburban home. She had prepared James's favorite foods and opened an expensive bottle of wine. The evening was pleasant enough until coffee was served, and Diana cleared her throat with the air of someone about to begin a prepared speech. "Now that you two are getting serious about the future," she began, "there are some practical matters to discuss." James and I exchanged glances. We had already been discussing these practical matters privately, where we'd live, whether to buy or rent, how to merge our finances. "I think it would be prudent," Diana continued, looking directly at me, "for you both to consider a prenuptial agreement." The suggestion hung in the air like a sudden fog. James looked uncomfortable but not surprised, which told me this wasn't the first time he'd heard this suggestion from his mother. "Mom, we haven't even set a date yet," he said, his voice tinged with embarrassment. "Exactly," Diana replied smoothly. "These things take time to arrange properly. Better to start the process early." I found my voice, which had momentarily abandoned me. "I understand prenups are common," I said carefully. "James and I haven't discussed it yet, but we're both reasonable people. If it's something he wants, I'm open to the conversation." Diana's eyes narrowed slightly, as if my reasonable response had somehow disappointed her. "It's not about what James wants, dear. It's about protection. For both of you, of course." The "of course" felt tacked on, an afterthought. "James has certain family assets to consider," she continued. "His father left a significant portfolio, and there's the matter of the family summer home that will eventually come to him." I knew about the portfolio, which James had mentioned was in a trust he couldn't fully access until he was 40. The summer home was news to me, but I kept my expression neutral. "I have a colleague who specializes in these matters," Diana added, pulling out a business card and sliding it across the table toward me. "Michael is very discreet. You could speak with him directly." The card belonged to Michael Chen Esquire with an address in the most expensive part of downtown. I picked it up, unsure of the proper response. "That's thoughtful, Mom," James interjected, "but if we decide to go this route, we'll find someone neutral who can represent both our interests." Diana's smile tightened. "I'm only trying to help. Michael is the best in the business." The conversation moved on to wedding planning, but a new tension had entered the room. On the drive home, James apologized for his mother's bluntness. "She's just protective," he explained. "She doesn't mean anything by it." "Do you want a prenup?" I asked directly. He hesitated, then sighed. "I haven't really thought about it. I trust you completely, but maybe it's the responsible thing to do? We could talk to someone, see what they recommend." I agreed, pushing down a small knot of discomfort. If a prenup would give James peace of mind, I was willing to consider it. I had nothing to hide and no designs on his assets, but something about Diana's involvement felt wrong, like she was inserting herself into a decision that should be ours alone. The next morning, Deanna called James while he was in the shower. When he didn't answer, she called me directly, something she had rarely done in our 4 years together. "Natalie," she said when I answered, "I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable last night. I only want what's best for both of you." "I understand," I replied, trying to keep my tone friendly. "James and I will discuss it privately." "Of course," Diana said, "but do consider Michael. He's handled all our family's legal matters for years. He knows the particulars of James's inheritance situation. It would simplify things." "I'll keep that in mind," I said non-committally. "Good," she replied, sounding satisfied. "This is just for protection, Natalie, nothing personal." But it felt personal, very personal. That evening, I brought it up with James again. "Your mom called about the prenup," I told him. "She seems very invested in us using her lawyer." James looked troubled. "I'll talk to her. She needs to step back a bit." "It's okay," I said, not wanting to create friction. "I just want to make sure whatever we do it together, as a team." He kissed me, always. The subject might have died there if not for what happened the next day. I was at my studio working on a project when my phone chimed with a text from Diana. When I opened it, I was confused at first. It was a screenshot of a text conversation, but not one I recognized. As I looked closer, I realized with a sinking feeling that it was a screenshot of the conversation between Diana and me from that morning, the one about the prenup, but what made my blood run cold was the caption she had added. "She's so dumb, this'll be easier than I thought. Michael says we can build in the dissolution triggers without raising flags. James will thank me later when she inevitably tries to cash in." The message had obviously been meant for someone else. Diana had sent it to me by mistake, a classic case of texting the very person you're talking about. I stared at my phone, reading and rereading the message, trying to process what I was seeing. Dissolution triggers? Cashing in? The implication was clear. Deanna wasn't suggesting a prenup for mutual protection. She was plotting something underhanded, something designed to protect James from me. As if I were a threat. My hands were shaking as I took a screenshot of my own, preserving the evidence before Diana realized her mistake. Then I put my phone down and tried to focus on breathing normally. My mind raced with questions. Did James know about this? Was he part of whatever scheme his mother was cooking up? Or was he as much in the dark as I had been? Before I could decide what to do, my phone chimed again. Another text from Diana. "Please disregard that last message. It was meant for someone else." No apology, no explanation, just a cold request to pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. I didn't respond. Instead, I closed my studio early and drove home, my thoughts a chaotic jumble. By the time I arrived at the apartment James and I shared, I had made a decision. I needed to confront this head-on, with complete honesty. If our relationship couldn't withstand this test, it was better to know now than after we were legally bound to each other. James was already home, making dinner in the kitchen. The domesticity of the scene, so normal and comfortable, made what I had to do even harder. "Hey, you're early," he said with a smile that faded as he saw my expression. "What's wrong?" Wordlessly, I took out my phone, opened the screenshot, and handed it to him. I watched as confusion gave way to shock, then dismay as he read his mother's words. "What is this?" he asked, though it was clear he understood perfectly well. "Your mother sent it to me by accident," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. "I think it was meant for her lawyer." James read it again, then set the phone down carefully as if it might explode. "Nat, I swear I had no idea about this. Whatever she's planning, I'm not part of it." I wanted to believe him. His horror seemed genuine, but doubt had crept in, a poisonous whisper. What if this was just more deception? What are dissolution triggers? I asked. He shook his head. I don't know exactly, but it sounds like clauses that would invalidate parts of the agreement under certain conditions. Conditions like what? Me cashing in? What does she think I'm after, James? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I knew well. My mom has always been protective. After my dad died, she got even more so. She has this idea that everyone wants something from us because of the family money. Do you believe that too? Do you think I'm with you for your money? No! The answer came quickly, forcefully. Nat, you know me better than that. You've never asked me for anything. Then why didn't you shut down this prenup talk immediately? Why leave it open as a possibility? He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I felt a small crack form in the foundation of our relationship. I guess I thought it was just a formality, he finally said, something that made sense given the circumstances. I didn't realize she had ulterior motives. The circumstance being that I make less money than you, I clarified. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, James? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like your mother sees me as a gold digger, and you didn't immediately reject that characterization. He tried to take my hand, but I stepped back. I need you to be completely honest with me right now, I said. Have you discussed a prenup with your mother before she brought it up at dinner? Another hesitation, another crack. She mentioned it once or twice, he admitted, but I told her it was our decision to make, not hers. And what about this lawyer, Michael? Have you already talked to him? No, I swear. But your mother has. About us. About putting dissolution triggers in our prenup? I took a deep breath. James, I need some space to think. This is a lot to process. Where are you going to go? He asked, panic edging into his voice. I'll stay with my sister for a few days. Nat, please, we can work this out. I'll call my mother right now, tell her to back off completely. This isn't just about your mother, I said quietly. It's about us, about trust. I need to figure out if it's still there. I packed a small bag while James made increasingly desperate appeals. He even called Diana on speakerphone, confronting her about the text. She was flustered, defensive.
I was only trying to protect you, she insisted. You don't understand how these things work, James. People change after marriage. Priorities shift. The only priority that's shifted is my trust in you, James replied, his voice hard. What were you planning with Michael? What are these triggers you mentioned? Diana sighed dramatically. Just standard clauses that would adjust the settlement terms based on certain behaviors. Length of marriage, fidelity, considerations, career choices. Career choices? I interjected, unable to stay silent. Were you planning to penalize me if I decided to freelance or take time off for children? There was a telling pause before Diana answered. These are normal considerations in agreements of this nature. No, they're not, I said. They're control mechanisms. Overreacting, Diana replied coolly. This is precisely why these agreements are necessary. Emotions cloud judgment. I looked at James, waiting for him to defend me, to shut down his mother's condescension. He did, but not as forcefully as I needed. Mom, that's enough, he said. We'll discuss this later. After he hung up, he turned to me, pleading, She's wrong, Nat. I don't share her views.
But you don't entirely reject them either, I observed. Part of you thinks she might be right. That's not fair, isn't it? You've had multiple conversations with her about this. You considered the prenup without discussing it with me first. There's a piece of you that sees me as a potential threat to your assets. No, that's not true. But we both knew there was some truth to it, however small, a kernel of doubt that hadn't been there the day before, but now couldn't be ignored. I left that night, ignoring James's continued protests. My sister welcomed me with open arms and a bottle of wine, listening as I poured out the whole sordid story.
What a witch, she declared when I finished. And James just let her meddle like this?
He says he didn't know the extent of it, I said. but he knew she was concerned, he just didn't shut it down. So what are you going to do? I stared into my wine glass, searching for clarity. I don't know yet. I love him, but this changes things. Trust is hard to rebuild once it's shaken. Over the next few days, James called and texted constantly. Diana even attempted to reach out, her message a masterpiece of non-apology. I regret if my actions have been misinterpreted. My concerns come from a place of maternal care. I didn't respond to her, but I did finally agree to meet James for coffee at a neutral location. He looked terrible, with dark circles under his eyes and a rumpled appearance that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said as soon as we sat down, about us, about my mother, about the future. Me too, I replied. I called Michael, he continued, asked him directly what my mother had discussed with him. It was worse than I thought, Nat. She was trying to set up a prenup that would leave you with almost nothing if we divorced within the first 10 years. There were clauses about career advancement that would reduce your settlement if you didn't maintain a certain income level. It was cruel. I absorbed this, feeling a strange calm despite the confirmation of my worst fears. And what did you tell him? To take a hike, essentially. In much less polite terms. He reached for my hand across the table. I'm so sorry. I should have shut this down immediately. I should have recognized what she was trying to do. Why didn't you?
He considered the question seriously. I think part of me has always deferred to her on financial matters. After Dad died, she took control of everything, made all the decisions. I've been working on becoming more independent, but clearly not enough.
And the prenup itself, do you still want one?
No, he said firmly. I trust you completely. I don't want anything between us, especially not some legal document engineered by my mother. His answer should have reassured me. A week earlier it would have, but something fundamental had shifted, a tectonic movement beneath the surface of our relationship. James, I said gently, I appreciate that, but I think we need to step back and look at the bigger picture here. What do you mean? Your mother has been trying to undermine our relationship from the beginning. Subtle comments, little digs about my career, my background. I ignored it because I love you and I thought we were a team. But when she sent that text, I took a deep breath. It revealed something important, not just about her, but about us. Us? Yes. The fact that she felt comfortable plotting this scheme, that she believed on some level you'd go along with it, that says something about the dynamic between you two that I can't ignore. James looked stricken. I would never have agreed to what she was planning. Maybe not consciously, I conceded. But you did entertain the idea of a prenup without discussing it with me first. You did have private conversations with her about our financial future. I made a mistake, he admitted, a big one. But doesn't everyone deserve a second chance? I looked at him, this man I had planned to spend my life with, and felt an ache of what might have been. Some mistakes change how you see someone. This changed how I see us. Nat, please, I love you. We can work through this. I love you too, I said, and meant it. But love isn't always enough. There has to be trust, respect, and boundaries. Right now, I'm not confident we have those things. What are you saying? The words were painful to speak, but they felt necessary. I think we need to cancel the wedding. His face crumpled. Cancel or postpone. Cancel, I said firmly. I need to step back completely. Maybe someday we could try again, but right now, this doesn't feel right. The next few weeks were a blur of painful logistics, canceling vendors, returning gifts, explaining to confused friends and family why the wedding was off. James tried repeatedly to change my mind, suggesting couples therapy, offering to cut contact with his mother, promising to do whatever it took to rebuild trust. Diana predictably showed her true colors when she heard the news. First came the coldly polite message. I understand this is a difficult time. Perhaps it's for the best that you've recognized your differences now rather than later. When I didn't respond, her facade cracked. James is devastated. I hope you realize what you've thrown away over a simple misunderstanding. I blocked her number after that, unwilling to engage in her manipulation. 3 months later, I was settled in a new apartment, focusing on my design business and slowly rebuilding my sense of self. James had respected my request for space, though he occasionally sent emails checking in, letting me know he was in therapy, working through his relationship with his mother, hoping someday I might reconsider. Part of me was tempted. I did still love him, but another part, a stronger part, recognized that what had happened was a warning sign I couldn't ignore. The accidental screenshot had revealed not just Diana's true nature, but a weakness in our foundation that might have taken years to discover otherwise. 6 months after the canceled wedding, I met James for coffee again. He looked better, more centered. I've been doing a lot of work on myself, he told me. Setting boundaries with my mother hasn't been easy, but it's been necessary. I'm glad, I said sincerely. I miss you, Nat, every day. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I miss you too, but I don't regret my decision. I know, he smiled sadly. That text was a gift in disguise, wasn't it? Painful, but clarifying. Exactly. Better to know now than 10 years and 2 kids into a marriage. We parted that day with a hug, the future still unwritten. Perhaps someday, when we'd both done enough healing and growing, we might find our way back to each other. Or perhaps not. Either way, I was grateful for the accidental screenshot that had revealed the truth before it was too late. Diana's text had been meant to deceive me, to trap me in a contract designed to protect her son from my imagined gold digging. Instead, it had freed me to make a clear-eyed choice about my future. She had accidentally given me the most valuable gift possible, the truth. In the end, it wasn't the prenup itself that had been the deal breaker. It was the revelation of what lay beneath it: distrust, manipulation, and boundaries that needed to be established long before any marriage could succeed. Sometimes the most painful moments lead to the most necessary growth. That accidental screenshot hadn't just saved me from a potentially disastrous marriage, it had taught me the importance of trusting my instincts, of demanding respect, and of ensuring that the foundations of any relationship are solid before building a life upon them. As for Diana, I heard through mutual friends that she had been crushed when James reduced contact with her. Apparently, she hadn't expected her manipulation to cost her the very relationship she'd been trying to control. Actions have consequences, even for mothers who believe they're acting in their children's best interests. A year after the canceled wedding, I received an email from James. He had moved to another city for a fresh start, was seeing someone new, and wanted me to know he was doing well. I have you to thank for much of my growth, he wrote. You had the courage to walk away when it was necessary, and that forced me to face some hard truths. I'll always be grateful for that. I wrote back, wishing him happiness and meaning every word. The pain had faded, replaced by something like wisdom. Sometimes the weddings that don't happen are as important as the ones that do. And sometimes an accidental text message can change the course of a life for the better.